On the sun-scorched plains of Texas, a lone cowboy makes a choice that will change his life forever, and could spark a war between two worlds. One starving child, 200 warriors, and a single night to prove mercy is stronger than fear. Stay with me through this story of courage, suspicion, and an impossible promise. Then tell me in the comments what you would have done in his place. And if you love stories of the untamed frontier, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The sun hung low over the Texas horizon, turning the prairie into a sheet of gold and heat. Eli Dawson straightened his back from the fence post he'd been repairing, wiping sweat from his brow with a calloused hand. The little creek that cut across his land shimmered in the distance, its banks lined with cottonwood trees swaying gently in the warm breeze. He was alone out here, just as he preferred it. The nearest neighbor lived 10 miles away. The only sounds were the rhythmic tap of his hammer and the faint gurgle of water over stones. Until something caught his eye. Movement in the distance, staggering and slow. Eli set the hammer down, squinting through the glare. A small figure wavered on the far side of the field, weaving like someone on the edge of collapse. As the shape drew closer, his breath caught. It was a child. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, dressed in torn, dust-stained garments of a native tribe. Her bare feet dragged over the dry earth, each step uncertain. Even from a distance, Eli could see her gaunt face, the cracked lips, the hollow eyes that told the same story: hunger. In these parts, most men would have reached for their rifle first. The history between settlers and the Comanche ran dark and deep, with too many raids and too much blood to count. But Eli Dawson wasn't like most men. He raised his hands in plain sight and walked toward her slowly, making sure his movements were deliberate and calm. The girl stopped, swaying on her feet, her dark eyes locked on him with a mix of fear and desperation. She mumbled something in Comanche, words he didn't understand, but then made a simple gesture, fingers to her mouth, then toward the creek. The language of need didn't require translation. Without a word, Eli bent and lifted her into his arms. She was light as a sack of feathers, trembling with either fear, cold, or hunger, he couldn't tell. Carrying her to his cabin, he felt her small head rest weakly against his shoulder. Inside, he sat her in his one sturdy chair and moved quickly to ladle leftover beef stew into a bowl. The smell filled the small room, and for the first time, he thought he saw a faint spark of hope in her tired eyes. He set the food before her, watching as she began to eat, each spoonful slow at first, then faster. That's when he saw it. Just beneath the torn collar of her shirt, hanging around her thin neck, was a beaded necklace with intricate patterns. Eli froze. He'd heard about such designs before. His neighbor once described them in hushed tones. These weren't just any beads. They marked the bloodline of Chief Iron Hawk, one of the most respected and feared leaders of the Comanche. And this girl, she was his daughter. Eli's gut tightened. He wasn't just feeding a hungry child. He was harboring the only child of the man who could summon 200 warriors to burn this place to the ground without a second thought. But she was still eating, still alive. And right now, that was all that mattered. By late afternoon, the cabin had settled into a quiet rhythm. The girl was asleep in the chair, her small frame wrapped in Eli's only blanket. Outside, the sky was shifting from the harsh glare of day to the copper tones of evening. The prairie smelled of dust and dry grass. Eli sat at the table, fingers turning over a worn tintype photograph. His wife and son, both lost to a cholera outbreak 3 years earlier. The edges of the photo were curled from years of handling. A vase of dried wildflowers sat beside it, their brittle stems a reminder of things that didn't last. The piece broke with the sound of pounding hooves. Eli looked up sharply. 2 riders were charging down the dirt track, dust billowing in their wake. By the time they reined in near his porch, he recognized them: Cletus Harper, a neighbor from 10 miles out, and Deputy Sam Dwyer from the county seat. Both men wore faces drawn tight with urgency. "Eli!" Cletus shouted before his horse even stopped. "You damned fool! What have you gotten yourself into?" Eli stepped outside, shutting the door gently so as not to wake the girl. "What's this about?" Dwyer's voice was grim. "Smoke signals. We spotted them from the ridge. The Comanche are looking for something, or someone." He hesitated, eyes narrowing. "Word from town says Chief Iron Hawk's daughter's been missing for 3 days. She wandered off during a hunting trip, got caught in a storm. We've been told a search party's following her trail, and it leads straight here." Eli felt the weight of those words settle like lead in his chest. He didn't speak, and in the silence, Cletus's gaze sharpened. "She's here, isn't she?" Eli looked from one man to the other. They had been his neighbors for years. Men who might not always agree with him, but who didn't deserve lies. He took a breath. "She's inside. Half-starved. Could barely stand when I found her." The silence that followed was heavy. Finally, Reverend Thomas, who had ridden up quietly behind the others, said softly, "Son, do you have any idea what you've done?" "I helped a hungry child," Eli replied. But even as he said it, the words felt thin. Cletus shook his head, pacing. "They'll think you took her. And if they already believe that, White Bull's been known to wipe out whole settlements for less." Deputy Dwyer mounted up again, urgency etched into every line of his face. "I've got to report this, Eli. But I'll give you a head start. Get her back to her people before they find you here." "In the dark?" Eli asked. "She can barely walk. And riding into a Comanche camp without warning? That's suicide." "That's your problem now," Dwyer said, turning his horse toward town. "But if Iron Hawk decides to make an example of you, he won't stop at your ranch." The three men rode off, leaving a curtain of dust in their wake. Eli stood in the fading light, the sound of their horses fading into the distance. Then came a different sound, low, rhythmic, distant. A steady beat carried on the wind, too measured to be anything but deliberate. War drums. The first beat was faint, like a far-off hammer striking wood. Then came another, and another, each one slow and deliberate, carrying across the open land as if the earth itself were warning him. Eli stepped back into the cabin and closed the door. The girl was stirring, her dark eyes opening just enough to catch the sound. Her head turned toward the window, and in that instant, Eli knew she recognized it. She sat upright, speaking rapidly in Comanche, her hands making sharp gestures toward the door and then toward herself. Eli couldn't understand the words, but the urgency in her movements left no doubt. He crouched beside her. "I know you can't understand me, little one, but I'm trying to help you." Her hands moved again, opening and closing her fingers in a steady count. 10, 20, 30. Her eyes stayed locked on his. 40, 50. She kept going until she reached 200. Eli felt his knees weaken. He had been hoping for maybe a dozen warriors, perhaps enough to talk to reason with. But 200, that was enough to wipe out every ranch within 50 miles. The drums grew louder, the beat so steady it seemed to sync with his own heartbeat. He moved to the window and peered out into the night. At first, he saw nothing but open prairie. Then they emerged, shapes riding out of the darkness like spirits, their formation spreading wide, a great semicircle closing in around his land. The moonlight caught the paint on their faces, the feathers in their hair, the glint of weapons in their hands. They didn't ride in chaos. They moved like a single creature, disciplined, deliberate, relentless. This was no raiding party. This was judgment riding on horseback. The girl tugged his sleeve again. She pointed toward herself, then toward the door, her eyes pleading. She wanted to go to them. But Eli couldn't be sure if that would save her, or seal both their fates. Then a voice cut through the night, deep, commanding, and in English. "White man, we know you have taken something that belongs to us. Send out the girl, and perhaps you will live to see morning." The words were not shouted, but they carried the weight of authority. This was Iron Hawk himself. Eli had heard the stories, how he had united several tribes, how he had never lost a battle against the cavalry. Eli's hand tightened on the doorframe. The girl gripped his arm and shook her head, making a motion across her throat. The meaning was clear, something was wrong. And then it struck him. She wasn't just Iron Hawk's daughter. She was his only child. If anything had happened to her while in his care, even if it wasn't his fault, Iron Hawk would have no choice but to make an example of him, a bloody warning to every settler in Texas. The act of saving her might have been the easy part. Now, he had to survive giving her back. Eli's decision came like a snap of dry wood. He opened the cabin door and stepped out into the night, hands raised high. The girl followed close behind, her bare feet silent against the porch boards. The sight before him was something he would carry for the rest of his life. 200 Comanche warriors forming a perfect circle around his land. Horses stood motionless, their breath fogging in the moonlight. Faces were streaked with black and red paint, eyes fixed on him with the stillness of hunters. Every weapon, bows, spears, rifles, was angled in his direction. At the front sat a man larger than the rest, silver streaks running through his long black hair. His posture was regal, but the fire in his eyes was unmistakable. This was Iron Hawk. The girl darted from Eli's side and ran to him, calling out in Comanche. He dismounted, dropping to one knee to examine her, speaking softly in their language. For a moment, Eli expected a father's relief. But instead, Iron Hawk's expression grew darker. His hand brushed over the beads at her neck, then his gaze lifted to Eli, sharp as a blade. He rose and walked toward the porch. The circle of warriors shifted, a subtle rustle of leather and feathers, the sound of readiness. "My daughter tells me you fed her," Iron Hawk said, his English precise, his tone colder than the night air. "You gave her shelter." "Yes," Eli said, his voice steady, though his throat was dry. "She was starving. I couldn't let a child die." Iron Hawk studied him, eyes narrowing. "She also tells me you saw the sacred beads around her neck. You knew who she was, yet you did not return her at once." Eli's mind raced. "She was too weak to travel at night. I meant to bring her back at first light." "Or perhaps," Iron Hawk replied, "you thought to keep her as a prize, to trade her for cattle or safe passage." The accusation struck like a blow. Around them, the warriors tightened their grips on their weapons. "That's not true," Eli said, his voice firm. "I wanted nothing from you. I saw a child in need. That's all." Iron Hawk didn't respond immediately. Instead, he raised his hand. 200 bowstrings pulled back in perfect unison, the creak of wood and sinew filling the air like the inhale of death itself. "You will prove your words," Iron Hawk said softly, "or you will die where you stand." Eli's mind spun, searching for something, anything, that could turn the tide before the arrows flew. Slowly, he reached into the pocket of his vest. The warriors tensed, every bowstring tightening further. "I kept this," Eli said, his voice even. He drew out a small, weathered scrap of cloth. "It caught on my fence the day I found her. I thought, you might want it back." Iron Hawk took the fabric. His fingers traced its edge, recognition flickering in his eyes. It was from his daughter's ceremonial dress, the one she had worn the day she vanished. "She came to my water," Eli continued, his voice stronger now. "I could have turned her away, could have shot her as a trespasser. Instead, I carried her here. I gave her my food, my only blanket. I asked for nothing." The girl spoke suddenly, tugging her father's arm, then motioned toward the cabin. Iron Hawk hesitated, then nodded sharply. "Show me." Inside, the air was warm with the scent of stew. The girl pointed to the chair where she had slept, then to the empty bowl on the table. She mimed eating, then sleeping, then pointed to Eli with a small smile, the first he had seen from her. But Iron Hawk's attention had shifted to something else entirely. On the table sat Eli's most treasured possession, a small tintype photograph in a simple wooden frame. A woman and young boy smiled from another time. Beside it lay a vase of dried wildflowers, their petals brittle with age. "You have lost children," Iron Hawk said quietly. Eli swallowed hard. "My boy was about her age. Maybe that's why I couldn't turn her away." The chief set the photograph down with unexpected care. Outside, the warriors still waited, their discipline like a drawn bow. But something in the air between the two men had shifted. Not peace, not yet, but the faintest edge of understanding. The girl began speaking again in a flurry of Comanche, her voice quick but certain. Iron Hawk listened, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he turned to Eli. "She says you could have used her, demanded ransom, used her as your shield. But you did not." Eli nodded once. "I have no quarrel with your people. I work my land. That's all." For a long moment, Iron Hawk said nothing. Then his voice returned, low but clear. "My warriors expected to find a kidnapper tonight. Instead, they find a man who spared a child. A faint spark of hope lit in Eli's chest. But before it could grow, Ironhawk's face hardened again. There is still a problem. My warriors cannot return empty-handed. They came for justice. If they go home with nothing but words, their anger will turn on me. From outside came a sudden shout in Comanche, sharp and urgent. Others picked it up. Eli didn't need to understand the words. They were calling for blood. The voices outside swelled, hard and fast, the sound of a crowd sharpening into a single demand. Ironhawk's jaw tightened. Some of my young warriors believe any white man who touches a Comanche child must pay the price. They think I am weak for speaking instead of striking. Eli glanced toward the door. The shadows beyond the threshold shifted, and then a figure stepped through, broad-shouldered, his face crisscrossed with scars. His eyes burned with the kind of fury that came from deep wounds. This was Broken Arrow, a war leader whose name was spoken with equal parts fear and respect. He strode forward, his lance gripped tight, its iron tip gleaming in the firelight. His voice erupted in rapid Comanche, the rhythm like the crack of a whip. Eli didn't know the words, but he didn't need a translation. This was a challenge. Ironhawk answered in a tone that was calm but edged with steel. The two men stood toe-to-toe, the space between them charged like the air before a storm. Warriors gathered near the doorway, some siding with their chief, others shifting behind Broken Arrow. The discipline of the circle outside was beginning to fray. Broken Arrow took another step forward, the point of his lance almost touching Ironhawk's chest. The meaning was unmistakable. Follow the old law of blood for blood, or be seen as unfit to lead. The air in the cabin was thick with silence. Then a small shadow moved between them. The girl. She planted herself between her father and the warrior, her chin lifted, her voice rising in clear, sharp Comanche. Whatever she said, it froze Broken Arrow in place. The harsh lines of his face flickered from anger to confusion, then to something that might have been shame. Ironhawk translated quietly. She is telling him how she got lost in the storm. How she wandered for days without food or water. How she thought she would die. Until you found her. The girl's voice grew stronger. She pointed to Eli, mimed eating and sleeping, then placed her hand over her heart. Even warriors who had stood with Broken Arrow leaned closer to hear. She is telling them about your photograph, Ironhawk continued. How she saw the sadness in your eyes. How you helped her because you understood loss, not because you wished harm. Broken Arrow's lance dipped, but his doubt lingered. He said something short, and Eli caught one word, Wasatchu. White man. Not meant kindly. The girl's reply was fierce and immediate. She stepped closer to Broken Arrow, asking him a question that made several warriors look away. She is asking, Ironhawk said slowly, if he has children, and if his child were dying of hunger in the wilderness, what would he want a stranger to do? The lance fell to Broken Arrow's side, but the girl was not finished. She turned to address all who stood in the doorway, her words slicing through the tension. She tells them, Ironhawk said, his voice almost reverent, that to punish mercy would make us no better than those who kill without asking. That if we strike down kindness, we become the monsters the white men already believe us to be. Silence followed, deep and still. 200 warriors stood in the moonlight, caught between the weight of their anger and the truth in a child's voice. Ironhawk stood in the doorway, his gaze sweeping over the warriors gathered outside. The circle was no longer a perfect wall of hostility. Some faces had softened, others still burned with suspicion, but the current had shifted. The girl's voice had done what steel and blood could not. It had opened a sliver of space for something other than war. Still, Ironhawk turned back to Eli with eyes that were sharp and unyielding. My daughter has calmed the fire for now, he said. But words on the wind are not enough. My people must see proof with their own eyes. Tonight, you will ride to our village and stand before our council. There, you will answer for your actions. If they believe you, you will live. If not, his voice trailed off, but the meaning was clear. The girl reached for Eli's hand. She wasn't pleading, her grip was steady, certain. It felt less like a child asking for help and more like an ally offering it. Eli nodded. All right. Within minutes, he was on horseback, flanked by Ironhawk and 24 mounted warriors. The rest melted back into the darkness, their formation breaking with the soft shuffle of hooves. The night air was cold and dry, carrying the scent of sage and dust. They rode hard but silent, following narrow trails that wound through hidden canyons and across ridges Eli had never known existed. The land here seemed to belong to another world, one that kept its secrets from men like him. Hours passed. The moon climbed high, casting silver over the stones. Then, as they crested a final rise, Eli saw it, the Comanche village. Dozens of fires burned low, their light flickering against the hide walls of lodges. Figures moved in the shadows, the murmur of voices spreading as word of their arrival rippled through the camp. They rode straight to the center, where a wide fire pit blazed brighter than the rest. 7 elders sat in a half-circle, their faces carved with the deep lines of age and experience. Each wore garments heavy with beadwork and feathers, their eyes steady as they watched the newcomers dismount. Iron Hawk spoke first, his voice carrying across the gathering. He told of his daughter's disappearance, of the search, and of finding her here, alive, fed, and unharmed. Then Broken Arrow stepped forward. Though he had lowered his lance back at the cabin, his words now were edged with the weight of tradition. He spoke of old laws, of justice measured in blood, and the danger of appearing weak before their enemies. Eli stood alone in the firelight, the girl beside him. He understood nothing of their language, but the tone of each speaker was clear. Some voices pushed for punishment, others for restraint. The council's faces remained unreadable. Then the girl stepped forward. She spoke with a calm Eli hadn't seen before, her voice measured but carrying conviction. For nearly 10 minutes she spoke without pause, her gaze fixed on the elders as though she had known them all her life. When she finished, the eldest among them, an old man with hair as white as frost, leaned forward and asked her a single question. Her answer was immediate, unwavering. Iron Hawk turned to Eli. He asked if you would risk your life again to save a Comanche child, knowing the danger it could bring. She said yes, without hesitation. The elders leaned together, their words low, their expressions unreadable. Eli's heart pounded in the pause that followed. Every second stretched like a drawn bowstring. Finally, the white-haired elder rose, leaning on a carved staff. His voice was low but steady as Iron Hawk translated. The spirits have sent us a test, not of our strength in war, but of our strength to return mercy when mercy is given. The firelight danced across the elder's face, shadows shifting in the deep lines of his skin. You will be granted safe passage back to your land, Iron Hawk translated, his voice solemn. More than that, you will have the protection of our people. Any Comanche who harms you or your home will answer to this council. Relief surged through Eli like water breaking a dam, but the elder's voice did not stop. There is one condition, Iron Hawk continued. If any of our people come to you, hungry, wounded, or lost, you must show them the same kindness you showed this child. Eli didn't hesitate. I promise. A murmur spread through the gathered warriors, the weight of the decision settling over the camp. Some nodded in agreement, others looked away, but no one spoke against it. Then the girl broke the formality of the moment. She stepped to Eli's side, her small hand gripping his arm. Her voice, halting but clear, came in broken English. Thank you for saving me. Now I save you. It was the first time he'd heard her speak his language. The words struck deeper than any blade could have. The council began to disperse, the elders retreating to their lodges. Iron Hawk lingered, looking at Eli with something that wasn't quite warmth, but no longer hostility. You may not understand this now, white man, he said, but tonight you have stepped into our stories. Some will tell them with pride, others with bitterness, but they will be told. Eli gave a small nod. Stories are better than graves. Iron Hawk's gaze held him for a moment longer before he turned to leave. The girl remained, still gripping Eli's sleeve. She didn't release it until the last of the warriors had begun to move away from the fire, their weapons lowered, their postures eased. When they led him back to his horse, the camp felt different. The sharp edge of danger had dulled, replaced by a strange, fragile thread of respect. As they rode away, Eli looked back once over his shoulder. The girl was standing beside her father, watching him go. The trail home was long and silent, the hoofbeat steady under the wide Texas sky. But this time, the silence wasn't heavy with fear. It was something else, something that felt like a promise. Dawn was still a faint silver line on the horizon when Eli's horse crested the last ridge before his land. The prairie stretched out below, quiet and undisturbed, the long grasses swaying in the early morning breeze. But he wasn't returning alone. On either side of him rode 6 Comanche warriors, their faces set in unreadable expressions. They didn't ride as guards to a prisoner. They rode like an escort, measured, dignified, and deliberate. The hoofbeats echoed against the stillness of morning. Birds began to stir, their calls threading through the rhythm of the ride. Behind them, Iron Hawk and his daughter had turned back toward their own lands hours ago, leaving the escort to see Eli safely home. When they reached the edge of his property, the lead warrior slowed, lifting a hand. The others stopped in unison. The man spoke a single phrase in Comanche, then touched his chest and gestured toward Eli's cabin. The meaning was clear enough: your home is safe. Eli nodded his thanks. The warriors gave no further sign, no salute, no smile, but one by one, they turned their horses and rode away, vanishing into the tall grass as if they'd never been there at all. The stillness that followed felt strange after the constant pressure of the past night. Eli dismounted, his boots crunching in the dirt. He stood for a moment in the quiet, looking at the cabin, its weathered boards, the faint smoke curling from the chimney, the fence he'd been mending when this all began. He went inside. The chair was empty now, the blanket folded neatly on the seat. On the table, his photograph remained where Iron Hawk had set it down. Beside it, something new, a small bead from the girl's necklace, its intricate pattern unmistakable. Eli picked it up, turning it over in his palm. It wasn't payment, and it wasn't a debt. It was a message, a promise remembered. By the second day after his return, word had already reached the nearby settlements. It traveled faster than a rider could gallop, passed from saloon to mercantile, whispered over poker tables and across fence lines. They said Eli Dawson had faced down 200 Comanche warriors and lived to tell it. Some swore he'd fought them off with a rifle in each hand. Others claimed he'd struck a deal so cunning the warriors had no choice but to ride away. The truth, that a hungry child and a shared moment of grief had turned the night, was harder for most to believe. In the town of Dry Creek, conversations stopped when Eli's name was mentioned. Some called him a fool for bringing danger to his own door. Others, quieter, called him something else. Brave. Cletus Harper rode out to see him on the third morning. He found Eli working the corral, moving slow but steady. "Heard you came back with an escort," Cletus said, leaning on his saddle horn. Eli shrugged. "Something like that. They're saying your place is under Comanche protection now." "That true?" "That's what they told me." Cletus studied him for a moment, then gave a short nod. "Guess that makes you the safest man in Texas. Or the biggest target. Hard to tell which." When Cletus left, Eli stood for a long time by the fence, watching the sun climb higher. He thought about the girl, her small hand gripping his sleeve, her voice steady before the council. Somewhere out there, she was back among her people. Safe. Alive. Inside the cabin, the bead still lay on the table. Eli kept it beside the photograph now, the two objects side by side, a reminder that sometimes the smallest things carried the heaviest meaning. And in the evenings, when the wind shifted just right, he thought he could hear faint drumbeats far to the north. Not the drums of war this time. Something slower. A rhythm that felt almost like a heartbeat. The months that followed carried the quiet rhythm of ranch life, but something in the air around Eli's land had changed. Word had traveled far, not just through the settlements, but across the open plains to Comanche camps scattered beyond the horizon. At first, it was small things. A pair of hunters stopping at his creek to water their horses. A wounded youth brought to his door one evening, limping and pale. Each time, Eli gave what he could: water, food, a bed for the night, and each time, they left without trouble. By the first frost, his ranch had become something rare on the Texas frontier, neutral ground. Settlers came to trade or talk without fear of an ambush. Comanche riders approached without arrows drawn. The tension that had once hung over every encounter eased, replaced by nods of acknowledgement, brief but genuine. Not everyone in town liked it. Some muttered that Eli was too friendly with the people they still called enemies. Others warned that trust was a thin rope to walk, one misstep from snapping. But Eli ignored them. He had seen what happened when fear ruled both sides. One cold evening, as he was closing the barn, Eli saw a figure on horseback approaching from the north. Even in the dim light, he recognized her. The girl, no longer the half-starved child he'd carried into his cabin, but taller, stronger, her hair braided neatly and her eyes steady. She dismounted without a word, holding out a small bundle wrapped in soft leather. Inside was bread, smoked meat, and a new blanket, the beadwork matching the one she'd left him months before. "From my father," she said in her careful English. "He says, you are friend." Eli smiled faintly. "Then tell him, the same from me." They shared a quiet meal in the cabin that night, speaking little, but the silence was comfortable. The firelight flickered over the bead on the table, catching the colors in its intricate design. Outside, the wind moved through the grass in long, slow waves, carrying neither the sound of war nor the weight of suspicion. Years slid by on the Texas plains, each season painting the land in its own colors: spring's green wash, summer's scorched gold, winter's brittle gray. Eli Dawson's hair silvered at the temples, his hands roughened further by work, but the rhythm of his days stayed steady. The promise he had made that night in the Comanche village never broke. Riders came in need, sometimes carrying wounds, sometimes only hunger, and he met each with the same quiet care he'd shown a lost little girl so many years before. Over time, his ranch became more than just neutral ground. It was a meeting place. Settlers brought goods to trade. Comanche brought fresh game and fine hides. Around Eli's table, people who had once seen each other only through the sights of a rifle shared bread and coffee. The girl, now a woman in her own right, never missed a year. She arrived each spring, riding in from the north with gifts from her people and stories from the road. They'd sit by the fire, recalling the night they first met, her voice still carrying the same strength that had stilled 200 warriors. Eli never spoke much about that night to others. But in quiet moments, he would look at the bead on his table and the faded photograph beside it, and feel the weight of both, the family he'd lost and the bond he'd gained. When Eli passed away at 73, it was in his sleep, in the cabin he'd built with his own hands. On the day he was buried, riders came from both the settlement and the Comanche camp. They stood side by side in the prairie wind, paying their respects. Later, as the sun dipped behind the hills, the woman who had once been a starving child knelt by his grave. She placed the bead on the fresh earth and whispered something in Comanche. Then she rose, mounted her horse, and rode north. The wind caught her words and carried them across the plains, an echo of a promise kept, and a reminder that sometimes the smallest act of mercy can bridge the widest divide.